香港人好可憐，因為地少人多，好多時咧，我哋要喺山上邊起樓。就算你起好少嘅嘢咧，都好多時需要有好高、好陡峭嘅人造斜坡嘅。如果做得唔好嘅話咧，呢啲斜坡咧係可以幾危險下嘅。
高樓大廈咧喺斜坡上邊咧，好即係拍得好密咁嚟去興建啊。咁往往咧，譬如話一個地盤嘅發展，就會到佢挖地基啊，或者挖斜坡嘅時候咧，就往往露出隔離嘅斜坡嘅地腳啊。
香港嘅咧就喺雨季嘅時候咧，就好多時咧就發生就好喺短嘅時間內就好高密度嘅雨量，咁就好多時咧就係引致個山泥傾瀉。
山腳嘅地方咧就有呢啲咁樣嘅波積土喺度，比較鬆嘅泥土喺度，咁變咗就對嗰個即係發展嚟講係多一個即係困難嘅因素啦。
There's a consensus among geotechnical experts that Hong Kong's terrain, soil and climate pose a threat to buildings in hilly areas. They say that most people in the territory live in the shadow of landslides. The foot of Victoria Peak is a sea of multi-storied buildings. Yet geotechnical experts regard this as one of the least suitable places in Hong Kong for high-rise blocks. Close to the nearly vertical slopes, there are plenty of outcrops exposed by thousands of years of erosion, and the loose soil has accumulated on the sides of the peak. The area we call mid-levels stands on such colluvial soil.
波質島個土質本身咧就最主要咧就係比較鬆，所以嗰個土嘅強度咧都係比較低啦。咁所以喺嗰啲地方去發展嘅時候咧，即使你係起高樓大廈，咁當然你用打樁啦，係嘛？咁仍然間嗰個斜坡本身咧都係需要做啲工程咧，係嚟到使到佢穩固。譬如話將佢係切削得平一啲啊，或者係將嗰個表面嘅防護做得好啲啊，或者係如果有地下水嘅話，要將個地下水排走啊。咁諸如此類嘅工程咧，我哋都一定要係比較留意先得嘅。
In the 60s and 70s, the mid-levels came in for large-scale development. Slopes were cut and retaining walls went up. Experts say that site formation work in those days left much to be desired.
Well, here's an example of the sort of thing, the way that these buildings were constructed and the site formation works done in the 60s and 70s. You can see that there's a steep cutting behind this building here. The original hillside would have gone down like this, and to fit the building in, they've had to cut into the hillside. And in fact, if you look down over here, there's actually several levels of car park below that. There are more of these cuttings. And further down the hill, the cumulative effect could have a weakening effect on the hillside above.
This site on Poshan Road was the scene of the June 18th tragedy 20 years ago. Site formation work on Conduit Road had weakened the slope leading down from Poshan Road. Following torrential rains, the slope gave way, washing mud all the way down to Copewell Road. The landslip knocked down a 12-story building and killed 67 people. On the same day, another landslide in the Kwun Tong squatter area took 72 lives. In 1976, 4 years after these two disasters, a landslide in Sao Mau Ping killed 17 people. The government finally set up the Geotechnical Engineering Office, or the GEO, in 1977 in the hope of preventing further disasters. But tragedy was to strike again 15 years later. On the 8th of May this year, a landslide hit Baguio Villa.
When the Geotechnical Control Office was set up in 1977, it was faced with a large number of unsatisfactory slopes. You could say the legacy of the past. We have landslides in Hong Kong.
Dr. Andrew Malone, director of the GEO, says most of Hong Kong's disastrous landslides occurred because of inadequate geotechnical work. As soon as it was set up, the GEO embarked on a survey of areas in mid-levels. For 2.5 years, the 130-hectare area bounded by the botanical and zoological gardens Cane Road, Hollywood Road, High Street, the University of Hong Kong and Lugard Road on the Peak became the focus of an intensive investigation. There was even a moratorium on new developments in the area.
First of all, I think it showed that there was no immediate cause for alarm, in the sense that no areas had to be evacuated or emergency measures taken or anything like that. But turning to the other findings, the detailed findings, I think they fall into two categories. On the one hand, what was to be done in the future to avoid the possibility of any dangerous situations being created by continued development of the type that had been the case in the past. And on the other hand, works and studies to make sure that the existing condition, the existing slopes and retaining walls were satisfactory.
The GEO found 65 man-made slopes which suffered from inadequate geotechnical work. This retaining wall on Robinson Road, considered strong enough, had to be made thicker. The government will bear the cost of remedial measures on Crown land. As for work on private land, the government has made it mandatory for owners to pay for the cost. To minimize possible damage from falling boulders, the GEO has built a 2-row boulder fence above Conduit Road. But the fence can only withstand boulders that weigh several tons apiece. Still heavier rocks that appear in danger of falling are shored up with concrete to reduce their threat. On slopes where the underground water level is high, as on this site in Poshan Road, horizontal drains measuring 30 to 90 meters are installed to reduce the water level. For the reference of developers, the GEO has graded land in Hong Kong into 4 categories based on topography and soil quality. The mid-levels are a Category 3 area, which means there are many geotechnical limitations that make it unsuitable for high-rise buildings. Developing a site here would involve high cost, because the government requires builders to comply with many stringent conditions. For example, when tearing down old buildings, demolition cannot be completed in one go. It has to be done bit by bit to preserve the original support works. Such additional requirements not only complicate the project, but also increase its cost.
Well, it certainly increases the cost of development, because the strengthening, the measures that he has to take to make it safe are more expensive. But it also reduces the floor area of the development that he can fit in, particularly the bulk excavation limits. Now, on this site, under the old system, the developer would have wanted to excavate at this level right up to the front of the site. And he could have fitted another level of car parking in. But under the bulk excavation limitations, he has to go no deeper than the previous pre-existing excavation level for the old development on the site.
The GEO maintains catalogues on more than 10,000 slopes. The data was collected by a consultant company. The information on each slope includes its geotechnical data as well as its risk factor.
其實呢個所謂高風險啊、低風險咧，就係視乎呢個山泥傾瀉之後所造成嘅性命啊或者財產嘅損失嘅。咁同個斜坡本身咧會唔會發生山泥傾瀉咧係兩件事嚟嘅。土地工程署過去咧勘察呢啲咁嘅斜坡咧係根據兩個因素嘅，一個就係山泥傾瀉之後嘅造成嘅傷亡嘅影響啦，一個就係下塌嘅可能性啦。越高啊、越或者越斜啊，或者越接近民居啦，我哋就優先處理嗰啲。
In the last 15 years, the GEO has inspected the first 4,300 slopes and has used close to $1 billion of public funds on landslide preventive measures. But more than half of the listed slopes still have not been inspected.
我哋早期做嗰啲係比較高啲、大啲嘅斜坡，都係需要做呢個鞏固嘅工程嘅。咁咧就變咗要多啲時間去做。咁跟住我哋一路做落去嘅斜坡咧。 變咗越做咧就比較越做越細啦，同埋個下塌機會咧亦都係細啲嗰類嘅斜坡， 咁所以未來嘅日子咧，我哋咧就可以就預計咧1年可以做1000個，就5年嘅時間咧就可以好希望咧就睇埋呢5000個斜坡。
On the 8th of May, Hong Kong witnessed its heaviest downpour for 30 years. In just 8 hours, 300 millimeters of rain fell on the territory, equivalent to 12 inches. The retaining wall behind Block 26 at Baguio Villa collapsed, and a large quantity of debris was washed down to Blocks 43 and 44. 2 people died. The GO later discovered that this particular retaining wall was not on the official catalogue of slopes. In other words, no one knew that it posed any danger before the landslide. How many slopes are there in Hong Kong which, like the one at Baguio Villa, have not been included in the government's list? Are these slopes safe? These questions pose a major headache for the GEO. Following the Baguio Villa landslide, a team of engineers at the office has re-examined aerial photographs taken over the years. Using special stereoscopic microscopes, they hope to pick out information that's never been entered into official records. 3 months into their work, they still haven't found anything. However, they have come up with data that have not been included in the list of slopes. Since 1980, the government has required that site formation and geotechnical designs for all new developments in the vicinity of slopes be submitted to the GEO for approval.
私人發展咧就根據呢個建築物執行嘅條例咧，佢哋係需要入則俾呢個建築物條例執行處，而佢哋咧就將有關土力工程嘅圖則咧就發過嚟俾我哋審核嘅。而政府部門咧或者政府部門聘請嘅顧問工程公司嘅設計咧，亦都需要咧提交俾我哋審核嘅。咁呢方面咧就有地政公務科咧裏邊咧有個內部嘅指引，就規定呢各部門咧就要做呢樣嘢嘅。
Figures from the GEO reveal that since the late 70s, they found more than 1,600 previously unlisted slopes by surveying new development projects. But they never came up with any data on the retaining wall in Baguio Villa that gave way recently. The retaining wall at Baguio Villa comes within the Pokfulam temporary housing area. This housing area was built by the Housing Department in 1988. According to normal procedures, the relevant plans must have been submitted to the GEO for approval. So why is it that they failed to notice the retaining wall on this slope?
根據我哋嘅檔案記錄咧，房屋署咧就喺呢個發展嘅臨屋區嗰陣時咧係冇入到嗰個圖則俾我哋嘅。
咁所以你哋唔知。
Why was it that the Housing Department did not file the plan with the GEO? The Housing Department declined to comment. And the final technical report on this fatal landslide, released early this month, did not address the question of responsibility.
過去多唔多發生就係話政府部門覺得自己嘅工程啊唔需要經理審批而唔俾你哋，但係以你哋嘅角度嚟講，佢哋係需要俾職你哋審批嘅咧？喺
過去10幾年嚟咧，間中都會發生類似嘅事件嘅。
咁根據你嘅經驗，其實會唔會覺得即係對於私人嘅發展個監管咧係容易過對政府部門嘅咧？
其實冇話邊個容易定唔容易嘅，即係無論私人好或者政府都好，可能有時都係唔理想嘅地方咯。
When a government department does not fully comply with internal administrative instructions, there is not much the GEO can do. Private developers, on the other hand, are bounded by the building's ordinance, but in practice, loopholes exist. The reason is that the law does not require geotechnical works to be designed and supervised by geotechnical experts, and so geotechnical works are left to architects in many cases, resulting in errors. Very often, engineers at the GEO have to highlight errors on submitted plans in much the same way as teachers grade assignments.
我哋咧有時差唔多就教埋佢用邊一條公式咁去計嘅，有時甚至乎有啲即係好熱心嘅工程師啊，我哋同事咧淨教埋佢點樣做嘅。
都 mark up 咗一啲嘢俾你嘅，你站位咧就原則上我希望你擺咧就係擺多呢兩點啦。呢個 building 我諗俾多個 point 啦。我唔係幾中意放一點放一個 building， 因為如果有乜數字啲出入咧就好難有多個數根。呢七圖咧我已經 mark 咗啲咧，你就照改上得㗎啦。About the other two joints,
the problem becomes even more complicated when they run into complex geotechnical calculations. The engineer here is going through amendments for the 4th time with the architect in charge.
Push it out.
Okay.
Out of the geotechnical assessments for Hong Kong Island submitted by private developers during the past year, only 75% were prepared by geotechnical consultants. Half of the site formation designs were prepared by non-geotechnical personnel, and the problem appears to be taking a turn for the worse.
可能就係嗰個有關嘅承建商咧想慳錢啦。咁如果你要聘請顧問工程公司，咁肯定要俾多啲花費啦。咁或者另外一方面咧，就可能就因為土力工程處過去嗰10幾年出產太多有關嘅土力嘅標準啦，咪好似呢啲咁嘅有關嘅好多所謂紅皮書啦，咁有護土牆嘅設計啊，或者斜坡嘅設計啊，咁就好多時咧就變咗有啲唔合資格嘅人，或者啲年青嘅工程師啊，或者就或者今日結構工程師咧，佢就嘗試自己去做啦。咁就變咗好多時咧，就未必做得咁好啦。咁就變咗咧，就其實都係一個幾常見嘅現象㗎。
咁呢個窿睇唔睇得到個石位係咪同我哋設計嘅時候嗰個假設唔一樣？
Even if developers are willing to employ geotechnical experts, the effectiveness of the work depends entirely on how much importance developers attach to this aspect of instruction. Greg Wong is a geotechnical consultant in private practice. He says developers often ask him to provide only a design, and his job is done as soon as the plans are approved. But it's when work actually begins that mistakes occur.
土力工程同其他好多工程係唔同嘅地方咧，我哋就係憑住鑽孔嚟去估計嗰個地下嘅土質啊，好多時咧係有一種假設嘅成分喺處，好需要咧係開出個山出嚟之後，實地去觀察究竟我哋嗰個估計係咪咁正確咧？一發覺唔正確嘅時候，就應該即刻修改嗰個圖則㗎。
有冇一啲情形就係你哋覺得做設計都唔足夠，其實應該由你哋去做埋施工，不過發展商就冇要求你咁樣做咧？
呢個肯定有咁嘅經歷。好多時就係我哋就算寫封信去話我哋覺得呢個地盤嘅情況比較上係特別，個土質或者個地質環境係比較上係複雜一啲。要求佢哋考慮俾我哋去喺地盤處做繼續監管落去，咁佢哋都有陣時佢哋就會講翻轉頭話，咁政府都冇要求，因為政府如果佢係要求嘅時候咧，佢就會講出嚟啦。咁佢唔要求，我哋就唔使你哋去做啦咁樣。
Aware of this problem, the GEO sends a staff on site visits from time to time. But over the past 10 years, there were still 28 accidents resulting from failure to comply with plans or lack of supervision. Finally, the office is considering legislation that would require geotechnical engineers to file for registration. The legislation would also make it mandatory for geotechnical works to be handled by experts. It is also considering legislation that will require landlords to hire geotechnical personnel on a regular basis to inspect and repair slopes near their buildings. The Cornhill development lies at the foot of a steep slope behind Tai Tam Country Park. Should there be a landslide here, the consequences would be too serious to contemplate.
開怡花園建築嘅時候咧，係一個石山嚟嘅。咁就大部分嘅屋宇咧都係起喺個石山前邊，咁所以咧我哋就對於呢個斜坡嘅危險咧就非常之關注。 咁但係我哋知道咧，就斜坡咧，無論係填土嘅斜坡或者係石嘅斜坡咧，都係有潛在危險嘅。風化咗之後，或者經過風雨之後咧，都係有機會咧就會冧落嚟啊，或者係跌落嚟嘅。
Mr. Cheng used to be a surveyor with the architectural services. Experience tells him that even slopes that appear to be safe may suddenly turn treacherous. That's why every year he calls in geotechnical experts to inspect all the slopes within the perimeter of Cornhill so that necessary repairs can be made at once. The annual cost of this runs to $200,000, says Mr. Cheng. It's not common practice in Hong Kong to inspect slopes on a regular basis. Most owners don't even know that the slopes near their buildings form part of their property. 10 years ago, Mr. Sit moved into this Happy Valley building because he liked the idea of having a hill behind him.
背山面海咁啊，呢度就背山就變做個馬場，咁都幾好。咁多綠色嘅嘢係，咁啊比較靚啲咯個環境。
有冇諗過原來呢個山坡係屬於自己嘅業權範圍嘅咧？
呢個冇諗過，但係即係作為業主咧，即係如果即係嗰個山坡係自己嘅，咁啊梗係自己開心啲啦，因為你俾咁多錢買翻嚟個地大啲，咁啊買得着數啲啦。一般人都會咁諗㗎啦。
9 months ago, Mr. Sit and other owners received a government notice saying that the slope behind the building was dangerous and needed repair. They looked at the title deeds, only to find that the slope was indeed part of their property. There was no choice but to pool their money to get the slope fixed.
到而家為止咧，我哋就做咗個土壤測量嘅工程啦，俾咗大概65000蚊到。咁啊，另外咧就我哋就聘請咗工程師同埋則師。大概係15萬嘅，將來真係做個工程嗰陣時咧，大概100至到300萬不等啦。咁我哋業主嚟講咧，就梗係越少越好啦。因為我哋得48伙。如果300萬嚟計，加埋其他即係以前使咗嗰啲咧，咁一伙都要8萬到10萬蚊，咁都係幾重嘅負擔嚟嘅對業主。
Most people in Hong Kong live near a slope, yet the public does not seem to be overly concerned about the potential dangers. Last June, the government decided to make public as information on slopes, but up till the end of July, there were only 51 requests for data. Of these, half came from the press.